Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to this morning's YouthLead webinar on social media transparency and accountability during COVID-19, hosted by our YouthLead ambassadors. We are really thrilled to have this topic on our agenda this morning. My name is Sarah Slade, and I direct the Youth Economic Opportunities Network at Making Sense International. I'm also the Senior Youth Engagement Advisor for YP2LE, and I'm part of the broader YouthLead team, which includes Cassandra Jesse, who is the Director of Youth Power Learning, Maria Brindelmeyer, Coordinator for YouthLead, Rachel Stepka, who is our Communications Manager, Ikena Anyadike, who is our Knowledge Management and Communications Fellow, and Abolaji Omitagun, who is hosting this morning's webinar with our YouthLead ambassadors. Before we get started, I want to give you a little bit of background about Youth Power Learning and what we do here, and how we support YouthLead. So YouthLead is a global network of more than 6,500 young changemakers from around the globe that started as an activity under the USAID-funded Youth Power Learning project. Youth Power Learning is focused on sharing knowledge, tools, and best practices for what works in positive youth development. If you're not familiar with what positive youth development is, we define this as a concept that includes 4 components. The first idea is that youth have assets, and they should have the ability to leverage those assets through agency, as well as the ability to contribute to positive change for themselves and their communities. To do this, youth should be surrounded by an enabling environment that supports them. So that's the basic concept of positive youth development, or PYD. When we started Youth Power Learning, the primary focus was on international NGOs, youth supporting organizations that were implementing youth programs or carrying out youth development research. With YouthLead, which we launched at the World Bank's Youth Summit in December of 2018, we shifted the focus to young people themselves, young leaders, and the goal was to provide connections and support for youth-led and youth-serving organizations run by young people. The vision for YouthLead is to serve as a global hub for young changemakers, ages 15 to 35, enabling them to maximize their impact through networking, mentoring, and access to information. The platform offers young people information about opportunities, a way to connect, access learning activities like today's, funding opportunities, and to broaden your global networks and circles beyond your immediate in your community. The site is available in English and Spanish and French, and we also have Google Translate on every page to make the site more broadly available. Before we kick off, I also wanted to share a little bit about some of our activities around responding to the COVID-19 pandemic. We're doing a number of things right now on the platform to try and support young people during this time. The first thing I want to point you to is a COVID-19 information page. This is where we are providing information, research, and the latest up-to-date guidelines on how to stay safe and healthy and what you can do to support others in your community. We know there's a lot of information out there. We want to have one place where you can come and find verified, trustworthy information about the outbreak and what you can do in response. The second activity is a broader campaign. We started with something called the Youth Stop the Spread Call to Action. This was a campaign we launched a couple months ago about hand washing, social distancing, and fighting misinformation. And we asked our YouthLead ambassadors and our wider youth network to share messages with their communities around best practices and let us know what they're doing. And that resulted in a page on the site where we're highlighting ways that young people are taking action themselves in their communities to fight the spread of the virus and how they're responding, as well as a page for our partners to highlight the way that they're supporting young people. We've also rolled out a series of COVID-focused webinars on different topics like health and well-being, mental health, the environment, accountability, like today's. So we'll continue to do that in the coming months. But more broadly, we're going to be launching an umbrella campaign that's really going to be kind of like the overarching theme for all of these different COVID-19 focused activities. And that's called the Youth-Led Acts of Good campaign. It is currently on the site. We are making some updates to that, but we are inviting young people from across our network to take the pledge and commit one act of good in their community during this time. We know that young people are already taking action. You're taking the lead. You have initiative and agency. We want to hear your stories, and we want to have some of those public commitments visible. And the broad goal is both to support all of you, but also to highlight the ways that young people are already leading in response to the COVID-19 campaign. So there's more on the website about our COVID-19 activities, as well as the Youth-Led Acts of Good campaign. And please stay tuned. In the coming weeks, we'll be making some more announcements. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Abolaji and to kick off this, what youth can learn about the environment amid the COVID-19 pandemic webinar. And thanks again to our Youth Lead ambassadors, Jackman and Humayun, for organizing today's learning event.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I'm happy to have you all on the call today. As Sarah mentioned, our webinar today is a very interesting topic, and we'll be discussing on the use of social media and transparency and accountability during the COVID-19 pandemic. To offer us a bit of background, we are joined by two youth lead ambassadors. We have Jackman Koku from Cote d'Ivoire, and then also our youth lead ambassador, Humayun from Pakistan. Both our youth lead ambassadors will be offering us some insights as to what they are doing, which as regards accountability and leveraging social media to advocate for transparency and accountability in this pandemic period. They would also be sharing some useful insights and tips on how you can also get engaged or get involved in the on using social media to advocate for accountability and transparency. Without wasting too much time, I would like to hand over to introduce our first speaker, Humayun. Humayun is particularly passionate about using his academic knowledge and work experience of business enterprise and nonprofit sector to promote social media and social entrepreneurship in Pakistan. And he helps bring a radical change in his country by leveraging his skills and to basically promote young people's strengths in the areas of social entrepreneurship. Humayun, over to you. I'd like you to go ahead with your presentation.
Okay, thank you, Abulaji, and welcome everybody to Youth Lead Ambassador webinar. My name is Humayun. I'm a Youth Lead Ambassador from Pakistan, and I'm joined here by my fellow Youth Lead Ambassador from Ivory Coast, Jackman. So in the first half of this webinar, I will shed light on social media, its power, why it's so important during COVID-19 situation, and some of the practical insights that we as social change leaders can use to leverage the power of social media to bring change, and particularly about transparency and accountability. So since the dawn of 21st century, we have seen a number of remarkable discoveries and innovations. Just to name the few, it includes Bluetooth technology, broadband internet, 3D printing, smartphones, and of course, social media. So in a very short period of time, social media has come to occupy a very special place in our day-to-day existence. So a lot of you would agree that without social media, our lives today would be very different. So for me, social media is powerful because it is social media where we can use its reach and influence. So that is where its real power lies. So in one aspect, it has somehow rendered ideological, cultural, and geographical borders irrelevant, because billions of people are using social media to connect with each other, share ideas, work on teams, raise awareness, find numerous opportunities to advance their careers in just blink of an eye. So we have now cross-cultural, international, global networks. So that is the one aspect of social media's power. The second aspect of social media power lies in the fact that you can reach people in different parts of the world, and you can somehow change their opinions, and you can influence their psyche. And to me, it's a double-edged sword, because on one hand, social media activists like myself, we can use social media platforms to influence other people's thinking and bring about psychological awareness to them. But at the same time, in an era where fake news is on the rise. So when you are using social media, you are constantly bombarded by this influx of information, and you have to somehow play a very carefully, because right now, even this COVID-19 situation, there's a lot of misinformation and disinformation just floating around social media. So that is something which we have to be very mindful. So in the same instance, we have to acknowledge that social media has provided this platform to millions of people. Like, for example, according to this recent statistics, there are more than 30 million messages that are sent on Facebook and almost 350,000 tweets that happen within a minute. So this is unprecedented numbers. But during the COVID-19 crisis, it has even increased manifold. So, for example, in Italy, there's a 70% increase in the time that users spend on social media, and similarly in India, there's a 87% higher usage of social media than normal times. And before we can talk about how social media is playing a role during COVID-19, we have to look at its origin and rise. So social media has revolutionized and completely altered the way we send and receive information. And in this process, it has changed our perception of the world, because people take their digital personas as seriously as their physical selves. But we have to understand that the social media, the revolution that it has brought on has been powered by Web 2.0. And Web 2.0, or many other people call it the social web, is a platform or a group of technologies that are based upon participatory culture and where users generate the content. So many of you would remember the Web 2.1 from early 1990s, when we had these static web pages. So all you could do was to just browse through the pages. There were very little dynamic content available. We could not interact with the content, but with the advent of Web 2.0, we are the creators. Now the users are the creators of this web. And also with the advent of smartphones, it has become very easier. And in many ways, social media has become ubiquitous, because right now we carry our mobile devices with us all the time. So all the time we are building into the overall content on social media. And in many ways, social media is very different from traditional media, or what many people call the mass media. Like, for example, TV, radio, magazines, and newspapers, because using social media, you can focus and you can pinpoint your audience. And there's also, it has a very short time span. So it's constantly changing. The feed is endless. It also has a very dynamic nature. So instead of having just pictures or text, you now have videos embedded into the pages. You now have maybe animations and all that. And also, people who use social media have more control over the message. So a lot of businesses that are using social media, they exercise more control over their message, because in mass media, what happens is that once you spread a news, then you cannot retake it. But here you can go ahead and delete your tweet if you think that your tweet wasn't appropriate or something, or even in many other ways, you can control where you actually want to focus your message. And most importantly, social media is different from traditional media because it's a two-way communication. It's very important for social media professionals to understand that we cannot use social media just as a mass media. We cannot just send message and don't get the feedback from the users. So it's a two-way communication, it's a conversational tool. In many ways, it has helped empower the users, because users now have a say. So customers are empowered, and as I will discuss later, this can also translate into the empowerment of the citizens. So these kind of things make me passionate about social media. For me, social media is one of the most significant breakthroughs in technology. And it is quite obvious that now social media has become a permanent fixture in our daily existence. And like every invention, it has its pros and cons. But what makes me passionate about social media are its positive aspects and its role in changing our world. So, for example, there are like 5 ways in which social media has changed our world. For example, now it has become the leading source of news and updates. So very few people now have the time to watch TV or get their news from the newspaper or magazines, because we have our mobile devices with us all the time. So all the news in an instance reach all corners of the world like a bushfire. So it generates this ripple effect. People try to engage with the news now. They somehow become the newsmakers themselves. And it is also changing the way we govern and are governed. So I will talk a little bit about the government 2.0 concept later on. So in many ways, social media has enabled governments to reach citizens in more effective manner. And also citizens now have more ability to reach government. So it has somehow closed the gap, the power gap between citizens and the state. It is also a very empowering technology for civil society actors. So you can take for example, Me Too, or Bring Back Our Girl campaign. So these kind of campaigns, they are quintessentially social media campaigns, and they grew their base through social media and viral response to them. And for example, you can also take example of climate activist Greta Thunberg. So she is primarily a social media star. And just because she has this ability and reach to spread our message across the world, she now commands respect from all corners. And social media is also helping people and different organizations in better responding to the disasters, in coordination and other kind of activities. So I will talk a little bit more about the mapping technology and other kind of techniques, how different organizations are using social media to respond to the COVID-19 situation. And lastly, I would say that it's also helping to tackle world's biggest challenges. So human rights violation and climate change, social media is helping to do that. And these are the reasons why I'm excited and I'm passionate about that. And my experience in social media and social media activist dates back to almost 10 years ago, when I started working with some organizations here. Right now I'm working as a digital marketing specialist with an organization, and our focus is on finding low-cost marketing solutions by focusing on social media. So right now, amid COVID-19, we are going through some trying times. And during this time, social media has first and foremost given us a way to stay connected with each other. And we can, like, you can imagine, if there was no social media, it would be very stressful for everybody, because although we have these restrictions to go out, we are staying indoors, but still, because we have the social media, we can stay in touch with our friends and we can get the news and updates. And apart from that, government is using social media to monitor and contain the spread of this epidemic. Facebook now has COVID-19 information tab, and similarly WhatsApp and Twitter has their own resources to help the users. In many ways, it's also influencing public response to the outbreak. So I will discuss later on some of the ways in which public is using social media to respond to the outbreak. But one instance can be that we now have more information about where the hotspots are, and this information is available to us through social media. And also, for example, hashtags, wash hands, and other kind of power of hashtags is out there, and people are taking full advantage of that. In many ways, social media has also provided a marketing and selling platform to the business. So businesses who cannot operate from their brick and mortar stores, they can use social media. They are using social media to sell their products and services. It's also helping people fundraise money for those in need. So right now, there are hundreds and thousands of people in need of financial assistance. The social media and GoFundMe kind of platforms, they're helping people to raise money. And apart from that, social media is fighting misinformation and xenophobia during COVID-19. So I already talked about. So right now, Twitter, YouTube, or Facebook, to some extent, they have blocked a lot of sources that spread false information. Celebrities and experts and influencers. So social media influencers, they're also playing a very important role in telling people to stay indoor and stay safe and wash their hands. So it has now become possible with the power of social media. So just like social media has helped individuals to become more open and social and expressive with each other, it has also increased pressure on governments to become more open. And that is where the transparency and accountability domain comes in. So in last many years, what has become a very commonplace is that people, since they have power to review the products and services by different brands. So for example, we have Yelp, we have other kind of like Google reviews, where we can give reviews about different products. So it gives power to the individuals to send a feedback if they find a product faulty or if they're not satisfied with the services. In a similar way, taking cue from the business world, slowly and gradually, there's a shift towards citizenry empowerment and bridging the gap between citizens and the government. So this emphasis on e-government, e-governance, or the government 2.0, it has become possible because of social media, because now governments, they make sure that they have their platforms open to the public. So for example, in last few months, Canadian immigration authorities, they have been spreading the messages, important updates about their dynamic nature of immigration situation through their Twitter account. And that is one way of being transparent and accountable to the people. And you can also take example of, for example, WikiLeaks. So WikiLeaks became possible because of this collaborative culture where independent journalists, they upload the documents online, and then it somehow ensures the transparency in the government. And now the role of social media amid COVID-19. And moving from that to leveraging social media for transparency and accountability amid COVID-19, I have some insights to share with other young change makers, that during this crisis, they can use the tools to spread positivity and also to support transparency and accountability. So the very least that anybody can do is to observe and report. So right now we have these financial aid packages, trillions of dollars in different countries. And with this kind of financial aid coming in, there's a risk that there will be slight oversight or there will be mismanagement. And now this is a high time that we should take the power of social media. Like for example, you can take pictures if you see somewhere mismanagement, or for example, last week in my hometown, one of my friends, he used his mobile phone to make a video of some people who violated like social distancing rules, and this video became viral. So these kind of activities are very easy to do. Similarly, the power of hashtags to drive social trends is also, like for example, as I discussed earlier, hashtag COVID-19, hashtag wash your hands, and you can use hashtags to raise awareness, just like people did that during Me Too or Bring Back Our Girl campaign. Apart from that, you can also do some online surveys. So these online surveys play a very important role in mapping and also making sure that health facilities or different kind of services are available to people. So through these kind of surveys, we can come to know that which areas are at most risk and which areas they have the like least risk areas. And lastly, we can also, and there are some projects, like for example, in Boston Children's Hospital, they're using, they have this new campaign, it's called COVID Near You. So they're using mapping and crowdsourcing resources through social media to create a realistic and live map. Because not every hospital has ventilators, not every hospital has the equipment that is needed. So they want people to be aware of that. And this is something which is changing and which is saving lives right now. So, yeah, so is this the last slide?
Yes, Marion, yes, I believe this is your slide. I'll be introducing Jackman to take us to the next session.
Yes,
next segment. All right, thank you very much, Umayan. Thanks for sharing a really good brief and insight as regards to using social media, leveraging social media for advocacy. I would like to call on our next speaker, Jackman, who is on the front line of COVID-19 and how he's currently using social media to basically leverage social media for accountability and transparency in Cote d'Ivoire. Jackman is particularly passionate about promoting transparency and governance for a fair and equal society. Jackman, you are able to unmute yourself, so please go ahead with your presentation.
So, hi everyone, as Abolaji said, I'm Jackman Kwaku from Cote d'Ivoire, and I'm really passionate about transparency, governance, and youth empowerment. And in the next slides, I'm going to talk about what does transparency imply, and why is it important for youth to promote transparency amid COVID-19. And finally, I will share some tips how youth can leverage on the social media or even apply civic engagement to advocate for transparency in the country. Okay, so what transparency implies? So transparency implies openness, communication, accountability, honesty, citizen participation, public decision making, and making data available to public. So anytime in your country you see those values, it means that public or private officials are accountable. But if there is lack of openness, communication with the population, if citizens are not participating in the public decision making, there means that transparency is at stake. So as youth, we have to do something. We have to advocate to bring back openness, to bring back honesty in public domain. And also, it's very important, why am I advocating for transparency in my country? There are so many reasons. And as Kofi Annan said, if corruption is a disease, transparency is an essential part of its treatment. So transparency becomes a pathway for us to push back corruption. Corruption is affecting the world, so we need as youth to act. When you see the rise of corruption trends worldwide and in Africa in particular, you see that there are 5 regions out of 6 whose corruption perception index are below the average score. So this is really striking. That's why we should promote transparency. Look, when you look in the right-hand side of your screen, you can see that in the sub-Saharan Africa, we have 32 points out of 50. In the Americas, 43. In the Middle East, 39. In the Eastern Europe, 35. In Asia Pacific, 45. All those continents are below the transparency guide. Only the Western Europe is 66. So this means that all the continents are not doing well to fight corruption. That's why I'm passionate about promoting transparency to push back corruption. And according to UN Secretary General, the annual cost of international corruption amounts to 3.6 trillion in the form of bribes and stolen money. So 3.6 million are stolen every year, while some people are dying from hungers. Young people are not getting jobs because there is a lack of job opportunities. But actually, 3.6 trillion of US dollar are being stolen by corrupt officials. That's why I'm really passionate about promoting transparency. And the third reason why I'm passionate about transparency is like transparency and accountability lead to equal opportunities for youth and vulnerable people. You look, in Africa, most of the times, getting a job is equal to buying a job. So if you don't have money, it's impossible for you to get a quality job. And look, when you go to some villages, there are some vulnerable people there, they cannot even do their certificate, their birth certificate, because there is corruption. That's why I'm passionate about promoting transparency to curb the rise of corruption in the world. And we are doing great here in Cote d'Ivoire. How are we promoting transparency here in Cote d'Ivoire? In 2017, I launched the Corruption Quitte Ma Cité. If I want to translate it, it is Corruption Quit My City. And this is a project to promote transparency and accountability in Cote d'Ivoire. How do we go about promoting transparency in my country? First of all, we had an anti-corruption campaign. We collaborated with the Yopougon municipality, where we stuck anti-corruption flyers in the city hall to promote transparency in providing administrative documents such as the birth certificate. Because most of the municipalities, some people are taking bribe before giving a birth certificate. So this was our advocacy to make the official more accountable, providing document without taking bribe from people. And we had a great opportunity doing this in Yopougon. You can see on the picture at the right-hand side. And also another project we are currently doing is the Transparency Tool for youth capacity building. And over the past 3 years, 5 training sessions on the principle of governance held in 3 cities in Abidjan, Bouakéda is in the center, and Yamoussoukro, our political city. We have reached out to 205 young people from 90 young youth-led organizations. So during this transparency tool, our aim is to raise a cohort of servant and ethical leaders that are really champions of integrity in their community to push back corruption in their community. And also, amid COVID-19, transparency and accountability under threat. Before the COVID-19, transparency was at stake, but it become more dangerous. As Delia Ferreira said, the scale of crisis raises the risks and dangers of the theft of public money that should be used to save lives and rebuild livelihoods. So due to lockdown, integrity champions and whistleblowers cannot do field investigation. So can you imagine the corrupt people are taking advantage to the fact that champions and whistleblowers are not doing their job because they are locked down in their house, saving their lives, so they can take advantage of this fact and embezzle public funds. Another point is the risks such as hidden contracts and overpricing in public procurement. In that kind, we are in an emergency case. So people are caring for their life. They don't care what the government is doing. So the government can see that as an opportunity, officials can see that as an opportunity to overprice and also to give contract to their siblings, give contract to their parents and to their friends. That's why we should advocate for transparency amid COVID-19. Another point is like that. Emergency funds are generally dispersed in lump sums with limited transparency, conditions, and reviews. It is an emergency fund that the Monetary Fund, International Fund is giving to countries. So there are not so many conditions to get that fund. Corrupt officials can take advantage of that to siphon billions of dollars in countries. So we need to be careful and to watch over. Another point is also that information on how emergency relief funds are spent may not be available to internal and independent auditors in due time. Most of the time, auditors can check, you have a day-to-day checking or some monthly checking on public spending. But during COVID-19, they are in a lockdown, so they cannot have access to those fundings, to those expenses on time. This might create corruption and put transparency and accountability under threat. Another point is that in some countries, there is no clear database about the people benefiting the billions of dollars. The International Monetary Fund is dispersing to dozens of countries. When you take my country, for example, you know that we have some billions being spent to relieve coronavirus, but we cannot access database. We cannot access database. In many African countries, we have the same thing. We cannot access database. And how can we check on the spendings if you don't have a database? How can we follow on the public funding if you don't have a clear database? Corruption is still around, so we need to pay attention. Another point is that opportunistic criminals who may take advantage of coronavirus pandemic for money laundering. People may even give funds, can even support people, but do you know the source of this money or this money? We don't know, because we are in emergency state. We just take what comes in. We don't check. So it's important for us as youth to promote transparency so that we can ban money laundering during COVID-19. And amidst COVID-19 and beyond, promoting accountability becomes vital. So today I just want to call on youth. More than ever, you should make the government more accountable. Due to lockdown, as my friend Homayun said, social media are powerful tools for two reasons: to advocate, to ensure that the billions of dollars the International Monetary Fund is disbursing to dozens of countries actually benefit the populations. You can use social media, Facebook, Twitter. You can tweet, and people will share to make a voice. It's not the time you have to use Facebook for fun, but it's the time to use Facebook to report activities wisely, not to insult the government, but to use Facebook to report on activities wisely without insulting. This is a way to make our officials more accountable. Another way is to advocate for transparency in public bidding for sanitary kits to mitigate risks such as hidden contracts, overpricing, and favoritism. We have a lot of money coming in to buy sanitary kits, but who is getting these markets? Who is getting the privilege to provide sanitary kits? Are there siblings or friends of the government or the private sector? We should look into and tweet on that to make a voice so that people can make our officials are more accountable to that. And finally, next slide. Finally, I have some kind of advice for people who want to to raise awareness for an advocacy campaign advised to mitigate challenges. I'm advocating for transparency in my country. Fighting corruption is not easy at all. So maybe you might want to, in this emergency time, you might want to leverage on social media to make your constituents more accountable, but try to seek institutional support to give credit to your works. It's very important. In my case, I sought institutional support from the municipality of my community, and they support me. They have the brain on what I'm doing. It gave a kind of credit to my work. And secondly, seek mentors that work in your domain to show the way things are done in the area. Don't go single, but be in the team. Seek advice from mentors. They have gone a long way. They can show you how to avoid some pits and be able to have milestones. The third point is build a team of volunteers that are passionate about the causes you are fighting for. It's really important to have a passionate team. Otherwise, you want to reach your objective. If your team is not passionate about the causes, it might be very difficult. Some people might be a volunteer to fill their resume, to say, okay, I work with that organization, but really they are not passionate about what they are doing. Make sure you select volunteers that are passionate about your work. And the volunteers that are working in my organization are really passionate about what we are doing. So we can spend a lot of time talking, speaking, and fine-tuning our strategy to have results here. And fourth, raise funds from friends and donors, and always report activities to them. It's key. And also change strategy when you are not yielding impact. It's really important for you, because sometimes when we have a vision, we want to focus on that vision. But when you focus on vision and you know that you are not creating impact, it's really important for you to change the way, to change the strategy. It's what I did in the beginning with Coalition Quitte Ma Cité. I was planning to advocate using the municipality, sticking flyers in this municipality. But guess what? After our first campaign, the flowers were removed. We spent a lot of money putting the flowers. The flower was removed. So change the strategy, teaching or building the capacity of young leaders so that we have integrity champions that can be champions in the community to push back corruption. And also think big, but start small. Think big. Have a big picture of your advocacy campaign, but start small within your home, your community, then your city, then you go in your country, and then you can go out of your country to have more impact. Don't start from the top and come down. Go down of the ladder, and step by step, you can achieve greater impact. And lastly is keep on learning. Read articles, laws, and regulations that are in your domain. You cannot control your domain. You cannot have impact if you don't know laws and regulations that are linked to the causes you are fighting for. And also, as the COVID-19 ends, be willing to attend conferences and seminars for a robust knowledge of your domain. So these are the kind of advice I would like to give you. And I hope that this help you to advocate for more impact in your community so that transparency can be the role model activity in your country. Thank you. Abulaji, over to you.
Thank you very much, Jackman. Thank you to both of you, Jackman and then Umayon, for a very, very lovely presentation. honestly, you both have really touched on a lot of really important issues, the role of youth in really advocating and really driving home the point for, transparency and accountability. We've had some really interesting questions from our audience, and I would give Caitlin O'Donnell permission to talk. So Caitlin, if you could just unmute yourself and then ask your question, that would be great. Caitlin, if you can unmute yourself, you're able to speak and then ask your question.
Can you hear me?
Yes, great.
Oh, great, perfect. Thanks, Abalaji, and thank you to the two presenters. This was really, really informative and really helpful to hear your perspectives from your different projects and different experiences. So my question is around the first presentation talked about using social media to post evidence of non-conformance of community rules. So the example that was used was community members not social distancing during the pandemic. And I'm wondering, because behavior change research shows that, quote unquote, public shaming and negative reinforcement isn't always effective across, behavior change for both adults and youth. So I'd like to hear more about your thoughts on the line between using social media to support accountability and education, but then not veering too far into this quote unquote public shaming, which might be satisfying in the moment, but not necessarily effective in promoting change. Thank you again.
Thank you very much, Caitlin, for your question. Umayon, I think this question is for you, actually. So if you could share some light about what you think on this question.
Yeah, thank you, Caitlin. And this is a really interesting question. So the fact of the matter is that it's always a very tight rope to walk on, because most people take social media as a very, very casual tool. But as I mentioned during my presentation, that it can be a double-edged sword. You can use social media to bring about change, and at the same time, you can also use social media to maybe not do something which is worthwhile or beneficial to the community. And this particular aspect of social media can be very dangerous, especially during COVID-19 situation. So what I suggest is that instead of focusing on individuals, people who like to spread awareness through observation and reporting should focus on the events. So instead of talking about specifically individuals or one event, they should focus on the overall environment. So for example, recently we had this easing down of restrictions in our city here in the capital city, Islamabad. So as soon as it happened, there were like hundreds and thousands of people flocking to the nearest shopping malls, or they flooded the nearby parks. And so when they show the images, like I follow some of the influencers. So for example, there's one singer who is also social media influencer, Shazad Roy. He posted a picture of this very crowded place. So you actually cannot see the faces of the people. And it did not talk about overall, people per se, but he said that this kind of behavior is kind of irresponsible in a way that it can promote this increase, this uptake in human-to-human connection, and somehow we have to be careful in this situation, but I think to some extent it warrants these kind of warnings from influencers and people who want to bring change, that they should highlight that what is going on, is it beneficial, it is wrong, because when we see these images and they go viral, it can spread message very quickly. So that's my take on this topic.
All right, Jackman, would you want to shed some light on this question? Jackman?
I think Humayun said it all.
Okay, great. All right, so we have another question from Essie Farida. Essie, I'll give you permission to speak now, so you could go ahead and unmute yourself and then ask your question.
Okay, hello all. I salute the remarkable work and commitment of our speakers, and it's undeniable that networks are essential for the functioning of the world. Regarding COVID, the fake news has made social networks not credible. For example, we can see the case of the WHO with its declarations on Artemisia, which did not recognize as a remedy at the beginning. In addition, some remedies work and others do not, but it's always the same media that gives this information. So how do you intend to provide true information as a media? And I have another question. Could I ask it now?
Yeah, just go ahead and ask.
Okay. It's addressed to Jackman. He's talking about make your constitution more accountable. So for me, when I'm watching news and so on with coronavirus, corruption has reached a peak. The media show governments benefit from funds or raise funds for materials or equipment to support the population. And as an activist of transparency, if he learns that in reality these funds largely take a different path than the support of the population, how will he react?
Okay.
That's my question.
Thank you very much, Essie Farida, for a very lovely question. So, Umayon, if you could take one of the question, and then Jackman, you could take second question.
So the first question about the fake news, as I mentioned in the presentation, that is a real threat to the overall credibility of the resources of information. But I would say that what I think is, or what I read in different news outlets, is that you should be careful when you share the post. Like, for example, on Facebook or on Twitter, you should be very mindful to the fact that where this information is coming from. So, for example, if somebody has this post on Facebook which says that I have found this remedy to cure the symptoms of COVID-19, you should ask yourself, like, is this person credible? And my advice is to always go with the official channels. So for example, if you want to get authentic news, you need to be sure that it's coming from the original source, not from somebody else. It can be like right now, I can quote example of so many people who have millions of followers, but still they are spreading fake news in a way because what they think is right, they just go on the social media and use it. So my advice is to be mindful, always rely on official sources, and try to be mindful when you share the post, because once you share it, it becomes viral. Yeah, I hope this answers your question.
Hi. Hello.
Jackman, please go ahead with your question. Thank you, Umayon, for answering the question.
Okay, thank you, Essie Farida, for the questions. Okay, I just want to make a quick change. I talk about constituents and not constitution, but as the question is a good question. As an activist of transparency, if you learn that in reality, this one will likely take a different path on the support of the population, how will you react? The first thing is to check. My first reaction is to check the information and have more insight about the public funding, and try to Google, try to have to meet some of the officials, ask questions, interview, and collect information about the funds. This is the first action we have to do, because you cannot blame an official if you don't have the maximum of resources. So you should first have resources, have data that show that the public funds is not is taking a different way. That is the first step. And the second step, when you have the maximum, when I have the maximum of information about the public spending, then I can raise awareness within the network of whistleblowers and also within the people that are fighting corruption in my country, and go as a team, because alone you cannot have a voice. So secondly, go as a team because you have all the material you can share with the people that are in your network, and together you go to advocate and to raise awareness. As we are on lockdown, the perfect way to go about it is using social media. Using social media with the team to have voice and to talk about what's going. When we have voice, when you go on social media and you talk, you have many people talking about the same issue. You have some journalists on board, you have some investigators on board, you may have even some politician on board talking about the same thing. This can raise awareness, and if the government or the official is trying to do something, that they can step back and provide a sound and transparent, what can I say, disbursement of this fund.
Just to quickly follow up on your question, Jackman, we have a very interesting question from Jacqueline. Jacqueline, I would unmute you, and so you can go ahead and ask your question. I think Jacqueline is asking a question about data, availability of data. So Jacqueline, are you there? Jacqueline Ragasa. Okay, looks like she's unable to ask a question, but I would, Jacqueline is asking a question about how we can, for example, really request.
Hey.
Oh, okay, she's here. Hi, Jacqueline. Please go ahead with your question.
Hello?
Yes, please go ahead with your question. Thank you very much. I can hear you.
Okay, so I was interested to know, how could someone use social media without trigger fear to the community, especially during COVID-19? Because, you know, we're talking about be aware about maybe washing hands, to have social distance, but there is so many information, so many sources in social media which providing this kind of information. It's like it is overwhelming. So I think I was thinking that maybe you people could tell me how in some innovative way that other people could get the same information but in a different way. That's my question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And she also followed up with a question on asking how you and youth, for example, can basically request governments to really make their data open. So, for example, especially for transparency workers, how do you really request this data from the government? So, I think this would be our last question, and then Jackman or Humayun, if whichever one of you want to go ahead and address this question, please.
Okay. Hi. Okay. Talking about the data, collecting data, I think it's not easy at all. Even I'm facing this issue here because I'm a project researcher. Trying to get data from government is a difficult issue for us. And most of the time you have to go on Facebook or go on Google and try to Google, and all those information are not really relevant. But where to get relevant information are in some institutions, or some institutions are not disclosing the information. It's really, really, really difficult for us to get some of the information. And I know that OGP, the Open Government Partnership, is trying to push things in some different countries in Africa and even overseas. But actually, it's not an easy task for us to get information, relevant information. And this is one of the key issue we are promoting here, so that government can make available data for young people, for people to follow up on their activities.
Thank you very much, Umayun. Jackman. And Umayun, would you like to address the question of exploring new creative ways to address information for people?
Yeah. So this question about not triggering fear when providing information about COVID-19, I would say that it depends upon your tone in which you spread your message. Like, for example, here We have a very beautiful campaign here in our community. It focuses on not being afraid of this virus, but instead it tried to bolster people's courage to fight it. So it says that instead of being afraid, you should be ready to fight this, because it is not something that is, above us. Through community health, through collaboration, we can prevail over that through washing hands and all that. So I think when using social media, we should focus on positive aspects, and we should focus on our ability to tackle situations instead of spreading fears or misinformation.
Thank you very much, Umayon. Thank you very much, Jacqueline. Unfortunately, we are not able to take many more other questions, but I would really want to appreciate you both for for really addressing some of these questions and really sharing a lot of insights as regards how youth basically tackle the issue of transparency and accountability. I want to say thank you to for all of you that have also joined, Jacqueline, Humayun, Kehinde, Meenakshi, and Carlos, and so many of you. I'll be handing over now to my colleague who will be helping us, who will be wrapping us up from this webinar. Ikena, over to you.
Thank you very much, Abalaji. So I know most of the people on the webinar will be wondering how they could join the YouthLead network. But first of all, let me also thank Jackman and Humayun and everybody else who made a contribution to today's conversation. It was really enriching. Then how can you join and contribute? First thing is you request to join at youthlead.org, then complete your profile, you post your project, you contribute to discussions. When you contribute, you earn badges to increase your visibility, and then also subscribe to monthly YouthLead newsletters for updates. You could also join and share, everything that we are talking about on the platform on social media using the hashtags #YouthLeadGlobal and #YLWebinar. You could also like and follow YouthLead on Facebook at YouthLeadGlobal. Also reach out to the speakers and continue the discussion after this topic in the YouthLead discussion group at www.youthlead.org/discussions. You could continue the conversation there. Next slide, please. We also have sponsors who have made this webinar, as well as other webinars that we've done so far, possible. Top of the list is USAID, followed by everybody else you see. The sponsors are promoting YouthLead, contributing content, and they are leading webinars for the mini campaigns. We appreciate the sponsors. And finally, I would like to say a big thank you to Abalaji, who is in charge of putting this together, to everybody on the YouthLead team, to Jackman and Humayun for sharing their wealth of knowledge with everybody else. Thank you for participating in this YouthLead webinar. The recording of today's event will be shared with all registrants. Please visit www.youthlead.org for more information. Also remember the hashtags #YouthLeadGlobal and #YLWebinar. Also remember to follow YouthLead on Facebook at YouthLeadGlobal and also on Twitter at YouthLeadGlobal. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a great rest of the day, evening, night, depending on where you are. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep.